Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri Today I'm actually doing an anatomy study. It was requested by one of you guys, so I decided to do it. In this case I'm actually working on a hand study, so it's more of a life drawing study. Although I am referencing my own hand, it's still considered life drawing. So in this piece, what I was working on is I was just trying to figure out the general structure of the human hand, because even though I do a lot of illustrations, I personally still have a great deal of difficulty drawing hands, so I do have to regularly practice drawing hands for that reason. Now, as you can see, I actually did an initial rough sketch just so that the video would be sped up a tiny bit, so that you guys wouldn't see too much wasted time. So when I was doing that rough sketch, I was just looking at my hand and I was just plotting out the rough basic shapes for the surfaces. Now, once I did that, I put another sheet on top, and that's what you see me currently doing, is just finalizing some of those lines and structure to make sure it all works, because although I am drawing my hand, I can't hold that position forever, so it's easier to switch back and forth. So at this stage, it's more of a second pass where I am solidifying the structure, finalizing some lines, figuring out how I'm going to go about actually rendering what details, really basic stuff. So I haven't added any extreme details to this stage, mainly because it's not necessary. Once again, I'm trying to figure out the general structure, and once I figure out the general structure, then I can add the details for the image. Now, this image actually took about probably 2 hours in total to complete, and that includes the digital portion that you saw earlier in the quick preview. So it was actually a pretty quick drawing. It didn't take too long to do. But it is something that's necessary to do on a regular basis, just so you keep up your skills. Because if you don't draw for a while, you do become rusty. Even though I do a lot of digital drawing, I do find that if I don't draw traditionally every so often, it does become more difficult to transition between both digital and traditional. Same thing for digital paintings, however, I do find it's easier to apply my traditional skills to digital than vice versa. There's a lot more features that are involved in digital that allow me to do changes, so although I might be a little rusty if I haven't done digital pieces in a while, there's always the undo button, and it's a lot easier than erasing a cleaned up line. Because once you erase too much, it just becomes muddied and all that. So as you can see, I'm almost actually done this second pass of the drawing where I'm actually just solidifying the structure. So in this stage, I just plotted out the general details before moving on to anything else. Once again, the fingernails, very important. They also help make the perspective read, especially in the foreshortened areas, which is why they're necessary as well. Now I'm just really doing some tweaking on the overall structure before I move on to the next stage. So here's the next stage. This is where I'm actually doing, it's not a full cleanup, but it's more of a rough clean, if anything. And this is where I start really solidifying all those lines before I start working on the details. Once again, I'm not an actual professional cleanup artist, but I do tend to draw very clean, so my work is sometimes considered more of a rough, clean stage in most cases. So as you can see, I'm adding some of the details in the knuckles, making sure those details and the structure are correct in those fingers as I'm doing so. Making sure that, once again, the structure of the fingernail is wrapping correctly. Because if you look at your fingernails, they do protrude out of the skin, so there's a curved edge that overlaps on the fingernails because of that. So I was just fine-tuning some of those areas just to make sure it showed correctly. Something that really helps in a drawing is making sure that some of those lines just overlap a little bit more, especially in areas where they normally would. Just continuing those lines just past the connection points, because it really shows structure if you do that, and that's something I always try to include just because it does finalize a piece by doing so. So this video is not very much sped up. It's actually only sped up by about 500%, so the total amount of cleanup time was actually only about 45 minutes in total, I believe. Once again, it's not a full cleanup, but it's kind of close. I did go in after with a second pencil that was darker just to highlight some of those bottom edges to make sure that they read correctly. In case any of you guys are wondering, I'm actually using a 0.3 pencil in this case. It's not necessary, but for me it allows me to really achieve that extra amount of detail in a piece. The only downside to using the 0.3 is that it does tend to stiffen up the drawing, so you do have to be careful for that not to occur. So you have to make sure that your drawing is really well structured, has a lot of life to it before you use a pencil like this. And that's normally the case with any form of cleanup of any type, is that you lose that fluidity or a good portion of it once you tighten up those lines. But if you're really good at what you do, you can minimize that effect. Once again, I'm just adding some of that extra detail in the knuckles to make sure that the structure reads correctly. And I'm taking my time when I'm doing this. I don't want to rush this stage because it does make a huge difference. I'm trying to avoid too much feathering of the lines. I want a nice solid crisp line, but I also want to favor certain areas that are overlapping onto each other as well. Now you can see that because I added that curve onto the fingernail, the thumb, it really helps push that perspective for the thumb so that it reads more as being foreshortened, especially in that angle. Same thing with the pinky. Now with the pinky is, I didn't draw it in the stage before this, so because I hadn't done that, I was actually doing it at the cleanup / rough clean stage. Normally this is not how you would do that. You would always double check to make sure you have all the information, but in this case I did have a lot of preparation to do for the Comic-Con that's coming up this week, so I didn't do that. I just went straight to it into the cleanup stage, probably a little bit faster than I should have for this piece. Now, because of the type of position that the hand is in, especially in this area here, there's actually a lot of overlapping. There's a lot of creases within the skin because it's coming close together in that area. It's really bent wrist. And because it's so bent, there's quite a few folds right along that meaty area of the palm. And that occurs on both sides of the palm too, so the one that's connected to the thumb, as well as the one that's actually more directly connected to the pinky finger as well. Okay, so I'm just going in with a slightly darker pencil at this point, and I'm just adding in that little bit of extra detail that's required to make that structure really pop in the drawing. Now it's not too much, it's only in certain specific areas, but it does make a huge difference in order for it to read correctly. Now, a lot of people do tend to skip this stage because when you're actually animating, this is a much more time-consuming stage to do. But if you're just doing a general drawing or illustration, it's a lot less time-consuming. but it makes a huge difference on that drawing once it's completed. As you can see, just because I popped some of those details out, it really helps distinguish certain portions of the hand from other portions so that they read as being different portions. So now I'm actually jumping into the digital process where I'm actually just adding some basic shadows, basic highlights. As you saw, I just filled up the background with a very basic texture that I used in this brush, and I only actually used one brush for this entire process, mainly because I wasn't adding too much detail first off, and because I wasn't adding too much detail, I didn't need anything special or over elaborate as well when I was doing this stage. So I always start with the highlights first. It really helps me figure out where I'm actually going to draw some of those shadows and where my light source is, which I hadn't quite figured out for this piece as well. So I did have to do it at this stage. Just punching up some of those knuckle areas. If you look at your own hand, you'll notice that especially when your hand is closed, the bone beneath the skin actually becomes more visible. So any areas where the bone or tendons might be, you'll generally have a much lighter color to the skin. So for this reason, any of the joint areas, I added a little bit more highlights because of that, just to make those areas pop a little bit more as well. Now for the shadows, I only use the shadows to pretty much just punch up some of those highlights a little bit more, and to also help distinguish between, once again, different fingers and parts of the hand, because there is quite a bit of overlapping in the thumb and finger areas, and because of that, you need to make sure that your shading is correct and your line work is really good for those areas, just to make sure that it doesn't get lost, because you do want it to read as individual fingers as well. Just adding some shadows for the nails here. And going back to adding some of that extra detail just to distinguish between the different parts of the finger as well. Because once again, the fingers are folded, so that skin around those folds tend to bunch up a bit, and you want that to read. So this part of the process actually took the least amount of time. It only took about maybe half an hour tops. It was super quick. Most of the initial work was already done because I'd done all the line work previously. If I wanted to, I could have probably just removed the lines altogether because there's enough shading now that it's not actually required in the overall piece. But because I do like how it looks, I do tend to keep the line work in for a piece like this. So this is the finished product. It's just a very simple design, life drawing, but it's really good to do on a regular basis because it really does help improve your overall skills. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you and take care.